Art of War by Sun Tzu, the classic guide to military strategy. So, this book is a very famous book. It is maybe one of the most famous books ever written, which makes it something of an oddity that I haven't sought it out before now. This edition of the book I just found in a Goodwill, and I think this is one of the better finds that I've made in Goodwill because it is a sweet little hardback, which is in great condition and only cost me $2.49. So yeah, bargain right there, I'd say. But this is also a book which is much older than I had thought it was. I'm not overly familiar with like Far Eastern literary tradition. I had always just kind of assumed that the Art of War was like maybe 800, maybe 1,000 years old. But oh no, this little book is somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,500 years old. It is an old ass book. Sun Tzu was an ancient Chinese general who was a renowned master of warfare, and the Art of War is kind of just a brief, because it's not a long book, just kind of a brief compendium of his reflections concerning, well, the art of war. But though it may be old, I would say it has stood the test of time because not only is it still around today, still read today, it still has, or at least has the potential, I would say, to be of practical use because not only uh, does it function as a guide to like literal battlefield clashes and combat, it also can function to provide sound advice for uh, pretty much any scenario in which one is faced with an opponent. And I think that's what a lot of people read the book today for, is to kind of get a leg up on any kind of competition or conflict that they may be faced with in their personal lives. And again, I think it still has a lot to offer because um, the information in the Art of War pretty much still holds up. In fact, again, I had really no idea what the actual contents of the Art of War were. I mean, I just knew about the book. I knew what it was, but I didn't know really what it contained. But what struck me when reading the Art of War is that the information therein you might find to be kind of commonplace nowadays. There's really not any kind of earth shaking secrets that it imparts. It feels very kind of blase when reading it. It's very kind of, again, commonplace knowledge, I would say. But that does not mean that it is not valuable. Oh, no, it is valuable. In fact, the knowledge that the Art of War contains, I would say, is commonplace today because the Art of War contained it. With books, we stand on the shoulders of giants and whatnot. And I think the Art of War kind of exemplifies that because the information in it is not really, like I say, uh, earth shaking. It's very kind of just tried and true stuff that you may already know. But like I say, it is still immensely valuable because so much of it, if not all of it, really does just hold up because it is so tried and true. The information in the Art of War is basically just about, trying to maintain an edge when faced with an enemy and trying to, achieve victory in the most expedient manner. And there's lots of good stuff in here about, always keeping your enemy on their toes, not revealing yourself too much. In fact, it very much plays into kind of the Far Eastern martial arts styles, kind of, which are about flow and adaptation. And so a major thing which the book kind of says is if possible let your enemy strike first so that you can see and get a feel for their technique and their intents and kind of react based on that. Like when you're playing chess or checkers or whatnot, you may not want to move first because you want to see what your opponent's strategy is going to be, and that's another thing in here. But also, there's great stuff in here about mastering the terrain on which you fight. And again, while it means it in a very like literal physical sense, like the high ground versus the low ground, mountains versus plains, and how to make the most of these various terrains when you are having to do battle upon them. It could that kind of sentiment could be translated, I think, into more metaphorical terms in our modern day lives about like with debate and argumentation and such, and kind of how we um, pick and choose where we feint and where we lunge and whatnot. I think that a lot of this can kind of be translated into a more metaphorical sense, and because of that, its value actually may be more expansive than the more kind of concrete um, things that it was talking about when it was written. But then there's also stuff in here about spies and espionage, and how to kind of get your enemy to reveal themselves, and how to set your enemy off balance, and take advantage of any weaknesses that they may have. Again, just kind of stuff like that. Uh, I'm not going to go through it point by point, because so much of it again is just kind of commonplace by now, that even people who are not military strategists or military historians probably are aware of. Like you want to achieve victory, but you don't want to do it in like a pyrrhic fashion, right? You want to be able to beat the other guy, but in a way that doesn't just devastate yourself, right? And that's another thing that is in perhaps one of the most important things that I think that is in the art of war is knowing when to fight and when not to fight. And Sun Tzu kind of says that it's like, if at all possible, try to win without actual open confrontation. That is, you can starve them out, you can trick them, you can use the elements against them, use the environment against them. If at all possible, try to achieve victory without like actually having to engage in combat, and sacrifice some of your forces in that process. Um, so yeah, it's still sound advice. Really, I think this book more than holds up, because uh, so much of it may seem kind of trite and cliched, but things are trite and cliched a lot of the times because they are so valid. And I think the Art of War kind of exemplifies that. And what I also like is that every chapter in the Art of War opens with Sun Tzu said. It reminds me kind of the Analects. Like if you ever read the Analects, every chapter or verse or whatever it's called in that work opens with the master said this, the master said that. It reminds me as well of like the Confucius jokes, right? Of course, the Confucius jokes are taken from the way that the Analects are written. Like Confucius say, "Man who leap off cliff jump to conclusion," or Confucius say, "Man who put cream in tart, not always baker." But the Art of War reminds me of that, because every chapter opens with Sun Tzu said, yada yada yada, and I guess that's just kind of the way that works were written, perhaps back in ancient China. But that just kind of leapt out at me because it was kind of reminiscent of some things that I'd seen elsewhere. But yeah, The Art of War by Sun Tzu, with non-fictional works such as this, um, of a more non-narrative nature, I generally don't rate them, and I'm not going to rate The Art of War, because how could I apply my typical grading criteria to this work? But I will say, I think this book holds up. I think it holds up quite well. I think it is still valuable, and even though your mind probably will not be blown when reading it, because you'll be like, I've seen a lot of this stuff elsewhere, and I kind of just knew some of this stuff, um, you know, because so much of it has just, diffused out into the world, but it has done that because of this book. And so, or so I think. And so, because of that, I think the book, it still stands. It really does. It still stands. It's still a valuable work. and it's one that has had immense influence throughout the ages. I believe General Douglas MacArthur kept a copy of it with him wherever he went, and I can see why, because it's so the advice, the teachings in it are pretty sound, I would say. So yeah, not going to rate The Art of War, but I will kind of endorse its contents by saying I think they hold up pretty well, all things considered. So The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Have you read The Art of War? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said. And if you haven't read The Art of War, I could recommend reading this. Again, you're probably not going to have your mind blown when reading it, because it's not quite as earth-rocking as you might think, a modern reader approaching it. But again, I think it still stands as a valuable work, and one whose contents are pretty sound still. And I think there's still some good stuff to be gotten out of it. So yeah, I could recommend this. Definitely, I think it's still got things to say, and probably always will. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.